Okay, we now have all of our objects loaded in the layout, and they are a little bit different than the ones we modeled in the previous sections. These are the ones I had modeled earlier, and they're just a little bit different, but basically the same principle as before. These ones do have flat polygons for the Merlins going against the wall, and I've gone ahead and made different types of towers. And I'm also using the round tower gate, which we have just the one tower right now, and all we got to do is go ahead and make a clone of this and drag it over. And we're going to open up a surface editor here and change this texture on this tower right here on the gate. Could be at a slight bit of distortion, but we're going to render that and see how that looks, because it might just be a layout miscalculation. And it is a little off. We're going to leave it where it's at right now, and I'm going to work you through how we made the textures for the wall. And it's pretty much the same texture for just about everything except on the round towers, and of course the allures and the roofs. I'm going to open the surface editor again, and the typical wall, what we have for the color map, is for the first layer, we're using a texture from the Random Textures collection, Random Textures 2 to be exact, which is included with the tutorial. And I'm just going to show you, there's 20, that's at 25%, so it's a very high res texture, and it's very neat looking, very dirty, very old looking. And we're just using the bump map because we want to use our own color, and so we're using this as a diffuse and as a bump. And the other texture we're actually using, this is for the allure, and we'll scale it down to 25, and it's just a basic, just one square, which we are tiling across. And then we are also using this wood texture for the awnings on the curtain wall and one of the towers I had created, and the overhang, or sort of awning, on the keep. And the last texture we're using is just a simple brick, which we're using mainly as just a bump map to add a little more variation. Okay, back to the color map of the regular wall. The first is like the dirtier, more complex brick, and we're using just the bump map for color, actually. And we're also have a turbulence procedural texture, and it's black, and we've got it on multiply, and the opacity is only at 57%. And what that does is it gets rid of some of the tiling that you'll get. More complex textures are going to have some tiling. There's no way to really get away from that. And you can kind of see it here. You can kind of tell where the ends are, and then these two kind of poke up everywhere. But if we render it, because we have the turbulence on, that turbulent procedural texture, it's adding a lot of dirt and grime to it, and it kind of offsets what we have there. I'm going to do just a little bit farther away to show you the overall effect. And as you can see right there, we just have dirty spots, and it just makes it look like it's not so perfect, and so you can barely tell that it's tiling texture, that it's repeating itself. And like I said, we've applied pretty much the same texture to all the cubic parts, although we have lowered the diffuse on a strip like right here. Render that again. We've lowered the diffuse just a tiny bit, and we've changed the color, so it just offsets just a little bit. With the lighting the way it is right now, it's a little hard to tell, and we will be using radiosity with the final render, which is going to take a while, but it's going to give a really neat effect, and especially with shadows and things like that, it'll lighten everything up, and we'll have a nice bounce light. And now for the top part of the roof of the curtain wall, you see we're just using a wood texture, which is actually very high res, and all these textures are very high res, so you can zoom in quite a ways. Now I have my texture level down in layout so that it works a little bit faster, but if I was to render this right now, you can see the detail in the wood grain and things like that, and the brick. And you can also see close up the two different bump maps. You can see the straight brick and then the more complex brick, and it looks a lot better from farther away, but it still looks good when you're close up. And this wood texture is actually quite large, and all the textures from the random texture collection are really big, so you can zoom in really far. Let me just show you that. And we've got even scratches in it and things like that, so it looks really good. And now I've added this bar down the center as well, just so that the panels don't look like they're one giant long piece of wood, and it just separates them a little. And now I've also created another tower with an awning on top and another part of the wall. And you can see I added arrow loops to this part, and this is the same texture as well, and all we did was lower the diffuse on it. And I'm going to render that and show you that. So you just change the color a little bit and lower the diffuse, and makes it a little bit darker and looks a lot nicer. It's a offset then. Now for this top part, we have the panels going in different directions, and what we had to do for that was we had to create two separate surface names. We have one surface name for this side and this side, and then we have another surface name for this side and this side over here. And why we need to do that is otherwise the panels would be moving this way across these boards if it was all one surface. So what we do is create more than one surface, and then when we go and we copied this texture onto this texture. So two separate surfaces, same texture, but what we did was we went into the surface editor here, and I'll just bring that up. Let's see. And you can see we have roof 1 and roof 2. And what we did for the second one, or actually we did that for the first one. And we're not using the color map, the wood color map for this, we're just using the diffuse so that we can define our own color. And in rotation of the texture, we've done a 90% on the heading. So if I was to lower this down to 0 now, you can see we get that cross section as it's just going across. So change that back to 90, and then it looks a lot cleaner. Whoa, got a little less rows there. Okay. And we've done the same thing for the keep right here, which is a little different keep than the other one we had modeled earlier, but basically the same. And the door looks a little weird too. We just put a brick texture on it for right now. But change the color, so from far away it does look really good. And we made the stairs just a little bit darker to offset, but they're still the same, pretty much the same texture. Now for the round tower, what we had to do was we used pretty much the same texture, but in order to get it to surface correctly, because you can't use cubic, because if you're going to do cubic on a cylindrical map, you're going to get a seam. And in this case, we'd get 4 seams. So what we did was we just copy and pasted onto the tower here. Let's see. And we changed the mapping to cylindrical, and we wrapped it around 15 times. And that pretty much means that instead of the default setting is 1, and what it's going to do is going to stretch the texture around the whole object. And when you put in a number, it tells you, it's telling Lightwave how many times it should use the texture around it. And we've used 15, so what it does is goes 15 around, and then 15 up and down as well. And that's cylindrical on the Y. We've also altered one of the other towers to make it a little taller. It's more of a lookout tower. We also have a small tower that we've created right here, which is pretty much just this regular tower we had right here, except we brought it down and we deleted a section of the arrow loops. And we can also use that as a turret. And a turret is a tower that is built onto another wall or another tower. So what we could do is we could set it on top of the gate right here, or we could put it on top of the keep. And you can also leave them on the ground, and they look nice that way too. We also have our drum tower here, which is a little bit different than the other one we had, but we wanted it all to match up. And our keep is slightly different. We've added these accents around it just to diffuse the light a little and make it look a little different. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and get started and start putting together the castle.